Alrighty, so our collector today continues our French theme of the last 2 weeks. And if you remember in our presentation on Irénée Theriot, I mentioned that he corresponded and worked with a network of other botanists, some in France and some internationally. And several of those colleagues appreciated Theriot enough to name over 30 different taxa after him. And one of the names that you will notice several times is the author Cardot, which refers to Jules Cardot. And so here at Tennessee, this is one of 2 specimens we have collected by J. Cardot. It dates to July of 1881 and was collected in Meuse, which is a department in the northeast of France. It's also the name of a major river that flows from France through Belgium in the Netherlands into the North Sea. This Ballon is a commune in that department. You can see very near the border with Belgium. And I don't know if all of you find heraldry as entertaining as I do, but I had to share the coat of arms for both of these localities. One of them has some very interesting looking fish. And the other one includes, among other symbols, a pelican feeding its chicks its own blood, which is apparently sort of an apocryphal tale that has some religious symbolism, but it's not actually behavior in the wild, even though they believed at the time that they would do this. Anyways, fun side note. So this is a specimen. It is identified as Philonodus calcarea, and it's also called thick-nerved apple moss. The name comes from the thick nerve or costa along the center of its leaves, and apple refers to the shape of the capsules on its sporophytes. Per the British Bryological Society, it is found in Europe and in North America and thrives in wet ground and base-rich calcareous places. So Jules Cardot was a French botanist and bryologist. He was born in 1860 in Stenay, which is also in that department of Meuse. His father was a farmer, merchant, and mayor of the town. Cardot studied the classics in school, but became interested in botany. And he began collecting plants in his local department and surrounding areas, including into Belgium. He began to study mosses early on and wrote his first work on bryology in 1882. Cardot met the French bryologist Ferdinand Francois Gabriel Reynaud, and the two formed a very productive botanical partnership. He married Marie Piret, who was actually the daughter of a Belgian botanist, Louis Piret, and their son Henry was born in 1886, and you can see a nice photo of the family here in 1912. Cardot was interested in mosses from exotic countries, studying specimens he received from Japan, Taiwan, West Africa, Madagascar, Mexico, among others, and he became known as a leading expert on the mosses of Antarctica. In addition to floras, he produced monographic treatments on some families of moss, including Fontanellacea, which is a family of aquatic mosses, and Leucobryacea, which often grow in these cute little cushions. Cardot also studied Rosaceae, which is a family of flowering plants that includes a lot of edible fruits, like apples, pears, cherries, peaches, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, also almonds, also a lot of ornamental trees and shrubs, and obviously roses. From the 1880s through 1914, Cardot lived in Charleville in the department of Ardennes. And today it's actually part of a combined commune called Charleville-Mézières, which, side note, is the world capital of puppetry arts. And he amassed an impressive herbarium with a lot of important type specimens. He published regularly on bryological topics. During World War I, he worked in Paris at the National Museum in their phanerogamic collection. So those are plants with seeds, also known as spermatophytes. In contrast to plants without seeds, the cryptogams, like the spore-producing mosses, liverworts, ferns, etc. Tragically, when he returned to his home in Charleville after the war, he found his house looted and severely damaged by the occupying German army. There was actually a news story in the Bryologist Journal in 1919 titled Cardot's Collections Ravaged. The article includes excerpts from letters sent to Elizabeth Britton, who you might remember as one of the founders of the New York Botanical Garden. The first two were from Leopold Leske, who was a German botanist who wrote in 1916 saying, "Dear Mrs. Britton, as far as I know, there was no fight at Charleville, and I therefore do not doubt that Mr. Cardot's collections will be intact. Despite all this, we are not barbarians, and our soldiers do not tamper with scientific collections. Not even a North American grizzly bear does that." And later he said, "I wrote to you a few weeks ago. I hope the English have not hijacked my letter. Now we've received information from the War Office that Professor Cardot fled to Paris when the war broke out, where he has a son. His house is completely intact, and therefore nothing will have happened to its scientific collections." However, the letter from Cardot himself 2 years later in 1918 was not good news. It's a bit long, but I'll read the translation, which said, "Since our arrival here, I have lived through days which will certainly be among the most painful of my life. And if we had not had victory, which consoles us for everything, I wonder if I would not have been tempted to end my existence. You cannot imagine the sight presented by our poor house, the repulsive state of filth and devastation in which it finds itself. Everywhere broken furniture, lacerated family portraits, tattered books scattered from cellar to attic, cupboards, secretaries broken. Although all the keys were in the doors, all the beautiful old furniture disappeared and is replaced by other furniture which does not belong to us. The books that were not torn form an indescribable mess in the attic. One wonders how one can manage to mix a library in this way. It must be tiring work. Besides that disconcerting things, my collections, which were said to have been evacuated, are there in part in my hands. I found them piled up in the back of the attic, covered with my scientific library, which was thrown pell-mell on top. Unfortunately, my poor collections are far from complete. Besides all the unstudied materials, there's missing an enormous collection from Japan of more than 5,000, containing hundreds of new species, a collection of one for Andes, another from the Sandwich Islands, and yet another from Sakhalin, all probably destroyed and lost beyond return." So really heartbreaking to read. And in response, in another issue of the Bryologist, a resolution was passed saying, "Whereas it has come to the knowledge of the members of the Sullivan Moss Society by information received from France that a large portion of the valuable botanical collections and scientific library of Monsieur Jules Cardot of Charleville, France, has been destroyed or removed during the recent war. And whereas the city of Charleville being outside the zone of active warfare, this destruction cannot be laid to accident, but appears to have been a purely wanton act. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the Sullivan Moss Society deplore the loss of this valuable collection and library and condemn in its strongest terms the acts which led to the destruction or removal. And be it further resolved that the members of the Sullivan Moss Society extend to Monsieur Cardot their heartfelt sympathy and assure him of their active cooperation in obtaining such reparation as may be possible. And be it further resolved that all botanists in Germany be, and hereby are, called upon actively to aid in the returning to Monsieur Cardot any portions of his collection or library that may be found, and obtaining reparation for him in respect to the portions destroyed or lost. And be it further resolved that these resolutions be forwarded to Monsieur Cardot, and that a copy be published in the Bryologist." And it was signed by some familiar names, including Elizabeth Britton, Annie Morrill Smith, and Abel Grout, who were all members who helped to found what would become the American Bryological and Lichenological Society. Despite this support, Cardot was clearly traumatized by the experience. He vowed to abandon botany. He sold his remaining specimens to the National Museum in Paris. They weren't able to actually afford to buy them all, but some British and American associates helped to contribute funds to complete the purchase. And then Cardot focused on his work for the Economic Bureau of the Indo-Chinese government in Paris, which he had actually started during the war. He published some reports on commercial products from Indochina, which is basically mainland Southeast Asia, including on rice, rubber, silk, gasoline, and perfume. He became the director and worked there until 1931. And you can see in this bibliography of his bryological works, if you look at the top, so the last of his publications, you can see he's publishing in 1911, 12, 1913, 1916. And then there's a big gap where he's not publishing anything related to bryology from 1916 to 1930, when he did write on the dispersal of mosses into the British Isles. And so he stayed away for 14 plus years, but he obviously couldn't fully abandon bryology. So his last letter to Theriot, he actually wrote saying, "You know how much the questions concerning the dispersal of species have always fascinated me. I believe to be the first systematic biologist who has seriously dealt with the dispersal of exotic mosses. I will never console myself for having had to give up publishing this collective work that I had begun and whose elements have disappeared in the global turmoil. So Cardot passed away a few years later in 1934 at the age of 75. And despite the premature halt to his bryological work, Cardot described 40 genera, 1,200 plus species. He published over 100 bryological works, more than 20 of those with his partner, F. Renaud. And the pair created and distributed 2 sets of Exocati, so one on the mosses of Europe and one on the mosses of North America. In 1900, he was awarded the Montague Prize from the French Academy of Sciences for his work on the family Leucobryaceae. And in 1906, and then again in 1911, he received the Desmazier Prize for his work on moss floras in the Magellanic lands and Madagascar. And in 1923, he was made a Chevalier or a Knight of the National Order of the Legion of Honor for his contributions to science in France. And that requires a minimum of 20 years of public service or 25 years of professional activity with eminent merits. There are 3 genera and over 60 species, subspecies, and varieties that were named in his honor by a number of his fellow botanists, including several names you will recognize, including Thériault, Mbizot, and his friend and partner, Renaud. And Irénée Thériault actually wrote one of his memorial articles after his death. There are 690 specimens I found collected by Cardot in the Bryophyte portal. No lichens or nothing in vascular symbiota that I could find, but there were over 800 that he collected in GBIF and almost 6,000 in GBIF that were collected by other people that he identified. So I think still pretty impressive numbers considering how much was probably lost during World War I. So that is the story of Jules Cardot, and I'll end again with just the opening lines from Thériault's memorial article, which said, on November 22nd, 1934, in his 75th year, one of the greatest bryologists of the last half century, Jules Cardot, died in Charleville. If the unfortunate events of 1914 had not brutally separated him from his collections and forced him to abandon his studies, I would be allowed today, without any doubt, to hail him not as one of the greatest, but as the greatest contemporary bryologist. So a bryological career regretfully cut short, and it's sad to think what else he could have accomplished in those kind of missing years, but still very productive and celebrated during his time, and he made a lasting impact in the field. So thank you again for listening.